Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to the Between the Lines podcast. I'm Andy Keaton, and today we are joined by Peter Deppe. Peter is the co-founder and CEO of Commute, a universal charging network for micromobility. From supporting rights for student athletes versus the NCAA, a great story. You should ask him off the podcast, but a really good story. To challenging the status quo within urban mobility in a land built for cars. Peter's goals are to change the world for the better in his own unique ways. He's a recent Kettering University graduate and founded Commute together with a fellow KU grad, Scott Spitler, in 2018 during the early rise of micromobility. So we're excited to talk to you today. Peter, thanks for being on.
Awesome. Think thanks for having me. Great to be here.
And I think this is a really interesting thing. I mean, we'll start off, I don't know if everyone knows what Commute is. I think I first got introduced to Commute at like a startup pitch competition for clean tech, and I thought this was such an interesting idea. Can you just tell our listeners what Commute is? What is it that you offer?
Yeah. So jumping in one sentence, we're the Tesla supercharging network, but for anything smaller than a car. So the universal charging network for micromobility.
Nice. I like that. And if you're not watching, which once again, you should always try to jump on our YouTube channel and watch it. But you might be hearing some tinkering in the background. And that's because for the first time, we actually have someone in their office. And Peter is at is this where you actually are building these systems? You're at your actual manufacturing center right now?
Yep, you're correct. We're in the Flint HQ today. And you can, again, if you're watching the video version, you can see it's been a crazy few weeks, and we probably need to clean up a little bit from those late nights and pizza boxes and whatever else is around here. But it's a crazy fun time. So if you hear a saw in the background, that's probably on my side.
That's all good. I mean, I'm excited to talk to someone who's not sitting just at a desk in their home office like me. We're getting back to actually being, into the workplace. This is really exciting. So let's frame this conversation. Today, we're really talking about why universal micromobility charging will help save the planet. You gave us a great overview of what Commute does. But, besides outside of Commute, the idea of having a universal charger for micromobility, this whole charging system, is really exciting to me. Let's take a step back and talk about why it's important. So why does infrastructure have such an important place in the future adoption of micromobility? And maybe more importantly, why is it, or how has this lack of good infrastructure, good charging infrastructure so far impacted the adoption of micromobility?
Yeah, no, great point. And maybe we should back up and maybe touch on what in cases, or what does it take to make, quote unquote, a universal charging solution for micromobility. As lately we've seen a lot of talk out there from others saying that theirs is universal, but they're missing quite a few pieces that really makes it actually universal. So first and foremost, micromobility is kind of a wild west if you will, for standards. So you have a wheelchair that charges at maybe 24 volts, a scooter that charges at 42 volts or 56, and then you got e-bikes that maybe go up to 72. And all of the there's charging solutions out there that pick and choose one voltage. Well, how can you claim to be universal if you can only charge at one voltage? I have yet to see how that's universal. The other thing is a connection point. So for other ones that are dangling charging cables, you got to plug in. It only fits that one charge port or barrel jack or whatever kind of connector that one vehicle has. Again, not really universal. And then on the charging station, all ports need to be physically the same, all the same height, everything to have that standard to be able to work again as a broader charging network, not only with multiple form factors, but also between shared fleet vehicles like a Bird or a Lime or a Spin or like a Link or etc. Um, and then also personally owned vehicles as well. Again, it needs to be agnostic to all of these different partners, stakeholders. Otherwise, you're really missing a lot of the potential adoption if you're excluding a certain party from being able to use your infrastructure. So that's what really, what does it take to be universal? You need to serve the community and all of the different needs of form factors that are needed, as opposed to saying, all right, I'm putting in a station that fits this one bike or this one scooter. It's not really universal.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add in one thing here. I think this is a nice technical conversation. A lot of our listeners might not know what all of these technical, kind of electrical engineering, if you will, kind of terms might mean, but it makes sense if you kind of take a step back. You might know of, let's say something like, I don't know, an appliance or a hair dryer plugs in at a different voltage than like a cell phone charger, but you can plug them into the same wall. If you had to plug in different things into different walls, or your cell phone charger had a different plug than your computer versus your straightening iron, you wouldn't be able to use all of those in the same place. I'm just throwing out the first three things I could think of with a plug.
Yeah.
Same thing happens for micromobility. So that's a cool idea. You can actually now plug in anything, regardless of its voltage, regardless of its connector, to be able to charge at once. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, that's exactly it. And infrastructure, today could be, in our case, charging infrastructure. But in a lot of cases, there's infrastructure is a very broad term. It could also mean protected bike lanes, so that way you feel safe during while you're traveling on that bike, scooter, wheelchair, or maybe the delivery robots taking a delivery. It all needs to have not only the correct parking infrastructure, like what we specialize in, but also I know there's a lot of people fighting for protected bike lanes and really pushing forward on that. So that way during your trip, you're also, safe and feel like this is a place that where you're meant to be. And then further, that's really how you drive adoption, is you have the right infrastructure for the entire trip and for that vehicle on both end and start, or the end point and starting point. And that's really how you have a great system that will, people will actually use.
Sure. So this is the key piece: is we've got the technology in place, and we've talked in other episodes about the importance of this technology, but just having the technology is not quite enough. I mean, people are familiar with, the idea that if I were to buy, let's say, an electric vehicle, I might not have enough range, this range anxiety. So I need to have charging stations all over. The same thing exists for micromobility, right? That's what you're saying, is we need to have good charging everywhere. We also need to have good bike lanes, and we need to have all this in place. So infrastructure, once you have the technology, infrastructure is that next key point that has to layer in for people to adopt it.
Exactly.
So I think then let's get into this idea then of actual universal charging. Can you tell me a bit, like, why is this particular piece of the infrastructure puzzle so important to increasing adoption, and what kind of benefits to the system or to a user comes from having a system like Commute in place?
Yeah. So our biggest sort of mantra or motto here is, when we put in, infrastructure in our case, we want that community to take that infrastructure and be able to utilize it in a way that works for them. So again, the universal aspect of being able to park and charge in our case, again, going through the list, e-scooters, e-bikes, pedal bikes, even cargo bikes, delivery robots, electric skateboards, wheelchairs. I don't know if I mentioned that already. Again, anything smaller than a car, all from the same place. It gives that space more utility in that square footage for the community to choose that form factor that's correct for their trip. So our whole goal, again, is to allow people to choose a form of transportation or mobility that's other than the default single occupancy vehicle that they're always choosing, because it's the de facto mode that's easy to fall back on. But if you give them a set of infrastructure that allows them to have multiple options all in one place, it allows them to select, okay, maybe I'm getting groceries today. I'm going to go zip down to the Whole Foods or whatever grocery store you go to, and there's a cargo bike right here. Well, I might as well take it because there's and maybe in our case, a commute hub at my apartment complex, and there's a commute hub at the Whole Foods. Makes a lot of sense, and I can, have both the end and start, have the parking and security for that vehicle, and it's super easy, available, and accessible for me to do so. And I can feel good about it because it's a cargo bike, super sustainable, and again, you're out in the open, so you don't have to worry about, I guess, in the COVID days, as we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, being trapped in a bus or in a train to get somewhere.
Sure. I think that's I really like having these conversations on this podcast because I learn something new every day. And I think every time too, man, this would make my life so much better. Right outside my apartment building here in Montreal, there's a great bike share system here, and there's a great bike share hub right outside. But I really like the idea of being able to have different types of vehicles in that hub, because the bikes aren't built for me to go to, the grocery store and put a few bags in it. Or maybe I want to hop on a scooter because I'm feeling cool today, and I want to use a scooter instead of a bike. Or I want to go on a bike ride. So I want a bike, or I want to go a long distance. I want an e-bike. That's a cool idea. So having this universal system can really unlock the choice for you that you want to make. I think that's really interesting. So one of the other things then I think that's interesting here to talk about is, how does this type of infrastructure, this universal charging for micromobility, how does that impact both owned systems, right? I own my own e-bike, versus shared micromobility. I rent my e-bike from a bike share system, or I use a Bird or a Lime, or the ones people would know about. Does this help both of those systems, and how does it support each of those?
Sure. So we'll start over on the shared side. So for any ride share that's out there, again, just going back to our example, our hubs can show up within that rider app, so you can see available parking near you, and where they're at, if they're convenient or not. That ride share usually incentivizes riders to bring them back to a charging hub, because not only does it make it secure and charged and ready for the next rider, it helps lower operation costs for that operator of the shared fleet. So
Sure.
Very clean, easy system. There's really no extra steps to use, I guess, for, again, our charging hub. I mean, you would scan the QR code of the vehicle, it unlocks the vehicle just like it normally would. The hub also releases the vehicle, and then you go on your way. And then you can choose to return it to a hub, or you can choose to rely on the dockless solution. So it's kind of a hybrid solution, if you will, to park responsibly somewhere where that makes sense, or again, park back at a hub. So for the shared fleet side, lowers operation costs for the operator, keeps it secure, hopefully less dinged up for the riders. So that way, you're not hopping on a scooter that's like half fallen apart. And then it's also fully charged, so it's more reliable for the rider. Flipping over to the personally owned side, I used to ride a scooter to and from work when I lived a little bit closer to Commute every day. And, before we had hubs out in Flint, where do you park your scooter when you're at work? You can, like I did, awkwardly bring it inside the co-working space and up the elevator with me, which, got some weird faces and probably some frowns and like, oh, I don't know if you can really have that in here. But then when you had a hub outside, it's like I get to work, toss it in up front, and then you're good to go until you're
Nice.
done for the day and just walk outside, grab your scooter, and head back home. So a lot of benefits of not awkwardly taking it inside work, inside the coffee shop, inside your apartment, classroom. I actually had to take a scooter into the classroom when I was at Kettering back in the day. So again, you get to miss out on all those awkward situations if you have available infrastructure for parking and charging your vehicle, like should be happening. So that's, I would say, the differences between how we help both. I would say relatively they're all pretty similar. We help parking and charging, and then solving maybe some pain points on operation costs as on the side of shared.
Interesting. I like that. I like that story because I think, I think we could all imagine having to take your e-bike inside because you don't have a good place to charge it. I mean, the scooter at least slightly smaller.
Yeah.
I know, like at our Commutify office in Boulder, some folks have some new nice e-bikes, and
Oh, awesome.
until recently they had to take them inside the building because there wasn't good secure parking outside. But this really adds that security, plus it charges it for you. I mean, win-win.
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
that's cool. So can we talk about like a real world example here? How is a city looking to use this kind of system, maybe with the shared operators in it?
Mhm. Yeah. So I actually had a recent call actually yesterday with a major city here in Michigan, and they have right now two major rideshare operators that everyone really knows about, and this city came to us and said, we want one infrastructure that we put in to be agnostic to the vendor that we have currently in our community. Um, they're really against purchasing infrastructure to have it only work for one operator or one vendor, for that vendor or operator to leave the next year, and now that city is stuck
Ah,
with the bill and all the
yeah.
infrastructure they just put in. So it's really, and you see this all the time with mainly, I would say, docked bike shares, where the city will spend millions of dollars on putting stations in, although I would say docked bikes usually are there pretty reliably throughout, because the city somewhat owns it in a way. But they put in all that infrastructure in the case of scooters sometimes, and they leave that city, and there's infrastructure everywhere.
Sure.
And then taking that a step further, this city said, when we put in infrastructure, we want it to serve more people and have more utility. So we don't want it just for the rideshare operators. We want it for personally owned as well. So again, that's where we fit in, because we do the integration, with the shared fleets, and then we have our own, mobile app that you can download and see hubs for your personally owned vehicles near you. So you have both sides of it, and again, you can think of it as a Tesla supercharging network, a charge point, but for anything smaller than a car, because in the case of car chargers, they don't care if you're a rideshare car or a personally owned car.
Sure.
There shouldn't be a difference, and there isn't on the EV side. But in the case of micromobility, why do we have docked bikes that fit in a station that only works with their bikes, and it takes up so much space? That space could be used so much better if it was able to serve more people by providing more utility through acceptance of different form factors, as well as the shared and owned sides. So that's what we see, and we've launched in several cities here in Michigan and across the U.S., and it makes a lot of sense to have extra utility and also infrastructure that's agnostic. So that way, when a city buys infrastructure and puts it in, it's not just like a 1-year deal. Our infrastructure will stay there for many years and serve many purposes with many different people. And that's really what infrastructure should be, especially when a city or private property is buying it and installing it. It should have a longer lifespan than 1 year.
Sure. I think that answers a key question or concern that I'm sure cities and private companies or real estate would have when bringing in a micromobility solution is, what if this company goes out of business or they
Mhm.
leave or whatever? Am I stuck with this infrastructure? I think that's a really interesting challenge that this kind of solution is solving. I also like the idea that anything can park at the same spot. Like if there's two bike share systems and a scooter, and my personal vehicles, in the same city, I take one and I'm like, oh, I know there's a charging station over here, and I go and oh no, that's for the other bike share system,
Yeah.
right? Or that's for the scooters. And
Mhm.
then I'm like, okay, I need to pull up my app and be like, where do I take this one again? This one goes here. This other one goes here. Just make them all the same spot. And
Exactly.
and I think that's it's a genius idea. I don't know why. Once again, these ideas seem so straightforward. I think it's great. So we talked a little bit about the public side. On a kind of a private side, what kind of benefits could a commercial real estate or an employer or someone kind of get from implementing a similar type of system at their location?
Yeah, no, great point. And one area that maybe we'll touch on is like corporate campuses, for example. That's a great private location that we work with various corporate campuses, not only for employee commuting purposes, but also when they're on the campus and maybe it's a fairly large campus to get from building to building. And in those cases, maybe they're pulling back and having a smaller um, shuttle program, but now they're implementing micromobility for their employees that
Hmm.
are 1 to 3 miles away, where a scooter or a bike makes perfect sense for those employees. Not only get to and from work, but also everyone can benefit and enjoy it when they're going from building to building. Where again, micromobility's sweet spot is it's too far to walk, but it doesn't make sense to
Yep.
drive or hop on a bus.
Yep.
That's where obviously scooters and bikes shine the most. So that's one area. And I mean, you can apply the same thing to like our example earlier with an apartment complex. Maybe you have a hub or a station at your apartment complex, and then nearby at a grocery store or the coffee shop, or insert whatever business that you go to regularly has another
Hmm.
hub. You got a great connection point that you can just go down to your parking lot, hop on a bike, scooter, or whatever form factor you want to choose that day, and then go on your way and do your daily tasks or routine, and then come back always to a safe place where you have parking and charging available, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and you don't have to really overthink it.
So okay, so I'm listening to this and I say, okay, I really want to do something like this. This seems great. What kind of work do I have to put in as a city or as a real estate developer or a company or whoever it is to get some sort of universal charger in place? Can I use similar infrastructure I already have? Do I have to like tear out the road and put in new electrical lines? Like what do I need to do to get started?
Yeah. So I guess the great benefit of micromobility is, you know, you really don't need to go out and, in the case of car chargers, do a lot of work electrically to power, a supercharger or whatever, 100 kilowatt charger. That's uh, a lot of infrastructure that's needed to be put in to support that. In the case of micromobility, these vehicles are so small and micro that the power draw that they need is like basically nothing. It's like a laptop or even smaller in some cases. So,
Wow.
um, you know, there's charging hubs, I guess, that have a variety of different power sources. Ours, you can either plug into a standard wall outlet, or if you want to bolt it to the ground and route power underground and directly into the hub, you can do so. There's others that are solar powered. There's others that are battery powered, and then you just like swap out a giant battery. Um, there's really the great thing about micromobility and its power requirements. It's so small, it fits just about anywhere. And we have cases where we're indoors and outdoors, and
Wow.
again, it fits. Micromobility is great because it's micro and it fits everywhere, and it allows you to better take advantage of those small little trips. So, yeah, the utility of micromobility is just amazing.
I think that's first of all, a great pitch for micromobility outside of the charging infrastructure.
Yeah.
I like to think of it that way. That's smart. EVs do require a lot of power to get them charged up, but micromobility, I didn't know that, as small as like a laptop. That's pretty interesting. So I think what this conversation has kind of reminded me, and hopefully our viewers and listeners as well, is we've talked a lot about the technologies and the solutions in place, but there's more to it. It's a complete kind of system you have to put in place to really drive adoption of TDM and micromobility and whatever else it might be. We've talked about a fair amount of different things here. Some of it has gotten somewhat technical, some less so, but just so everyone can kind of leave the conversation with the point that is most important here. I need to remember one thing in a couple of sentences, kind of from your own perspective. Why will universal micromobility charging help save the planet?
So universal micromobility charging infrastructure will save the planet really because, again, of one main thing. It allows that community to choose the form factor that's right for them. And ultimately, that's how you get adoption, as opposed to force feeding them one form factor that's not right for them.
I love it. Short, succinct, just like micromobility, fit it into the right amount of space. That was great. This has been a really great conversation. To everyone listening, thanks for joining us again today. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, subscribe, comment, do all of the above. Wherever you're listening to your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or whatever streaming service you like to use. And today more than ever, you really need to check out the video on YouTube. You really have to see what's behind Peter. I've been watching behind him. A lot of activity going on. I can't wait till one day I'll visit you one day, Peter, because I want to take a look at this. I want to take a look at this facility. This is pretty cool.
Come out to actually, anytime.
Thank you. I mean, actually, where things are getting built, there's stuff happening. It's super exciting. So join in on the YouTube video and watch this conversation and future ones, and keep up with the episodes by joining our email list at betweenthelines.io. So a great conversation today, Peter, and we like to end it off every episode with a little bit of fun. We're building this music playlist, as our listeners know, on Spotify. Some of us aren't lucky enough to have the 10-minute, electric scooter commute into work. We need to fill the time with something else. Is there any song you'd like to add to that playlist?
Yeah, so just lately, for whatever reason, I've been listening to Feel It Still by Portugal the Man, and it's just kind of an upbeat, kind of happy, positive kind of song that's just kind of pressing forward, and it reminds me a lot of micromobility in a few ways, so that's why I picked it.
Nice. I like it. I love this playlist. It's so eclectic. We've got songs from all over the world, different types of songs. This is a really good one, a great addition.
Awesome.
Peter, thanks for joining me today. Everyone, thanks for listening. It's been a really great episode.
Awesome. Andy, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.